would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, my glorious rebels. It is Friday. You've made it. I hope it's been a good week for everyone. Best way to get in touch with me is over at the website www.therebelbroker.com. You can click on Contact the Rebel Broker at the site and send me any ideas, observations, suggestions, or questions you might have. And of course, we're still doing the whole take the survey to support the show thing. That's the big red button at the top of the site. That will allow us to kind of get an idea of the demographics of the folks who listen. It doesn't have any personal identifying information other than a request for an email address. And wink, wink, I've noticed that you don't have to input your email address for it to accept the form. I don't know what that affects it. I'm not in control of that form. And I'm not sure if they discard the ones that don't have an email address. But anyway. Of course, there's nothing that says you can't put a different email address in there. You know. I know how it is with privacy. I know I personally have one email address that I do actually occasionally peek in on, but I don't use it for anything. It is the email address I use for any random website that isn't critical to me. If it doesn't have to do with my money, it gets my junk email address. So maybe this is the opportunity for you to create one of those. Thanks again for taking the time out of your day to visit me here on the show. I really do appreciate it. And now with us getting ready to start up a weekend here, it's my daddy-o's birthday this weekend, so I'll be taking all of the kiddies over to wish him a happy birthday. I hope you have some other awesome plans yourself. I came across sort of a political thing, which I think will make a chunk of the show today. It relates to Dodd-Frank, and it's something you should care about. And you know, I'm not going to get... at first, I thought I'd do a here's what Dodd-Frank is, and realized that that would make my head hurt. Dodd-Frank is over 2,000 pages long. There's a whole lot of stuff in there, which kind of boils down to the more that the government gets involved and deals with banks and other types of things during bad times, the better that will go. And I generally tend to not support that opinion. And usually when we're talking about that, we're talking about this too big to fail mentality, right? And that's one of the big things in Dodd-Frank, where the government could come in and through government power turn a struggling bank into a bunch of little banks. And what Dodd-Frank actually ended up doing, if you want just a quick summary, it really solidified monolithic style of banking, where instead of having dozens or hundreds of banks, you've got one gigantic one, and it really propped up the very big players. It made lending very difficult. It made investing very difficult. And this isn't just me. So instead of assuming I know what I'm talking about, if you just go and Google what is Dodd-Frank, DODD-Frank, just read the top 10 articles that come up. There will be one or two that seem to think it's wonderful. And if you read those, I think you may come to the conclusion those folks are on some sort of mind-altering drug. And then you'll read the ones that are less generous, and maybe you'll fall somewhere in between, or maybe you'll think Dodd-Frank is the best thing ever. So whether you really love Dodd-Frank or whether you really hate Dodd-Frank, it's probably good to know that there is a political move afoot to change it, to modify some parts of it. I think that the modifications in general that are being considered here are pretty good. That they're still very much of the mindset of, you know, no problem is too big or too small, that us politicians getting involved in it won't make it better kind of an attitude. So again, if you're someone who thinks that's exactly right, that politicians should be more involved in everything, then okay. I tend to not support that idea. But I figured before we jump into that, we could talk about a few other little tidbits of news that I thought were interesting. Appraisal volume has fallen to 2 weeks straight. That's kind of interesting. Appraisal volume is really an interesting number to look at because, of course, when anyone gets a loan on a house or when any transactions are going on, you'll get an appraisal, but you'll also get appraisals for refinances. So it's a nice way to sort of see a blend of all of those different things. And it's interesting that it's gone down for the last 2 weeks straight. Not horribly unusual because remember where we are. You know, we're in the first week of September. School started a week ago, 2 weeks ago. So do the math, right? We know that the market tends to end there. So that tends to be a pretty normal thing. One other thing I wanted to mention, which is sort of a segue into discussions that we've had previously. And I know I get into this. I also happen to be kind of a tech geek guy, so I like to follow some of the cool tech that's going on. But I've made the argument before that we're moving into a economic time that has a lot of challenges that we talk about on a regular basis, but also a interesting evolution in how folks work, right? I've compared it to the Industrial Revolution with automation taking a bigger and bigger part of center stage in terms of how things get done. And an article came through my little news filter that I thought I'd share. The headline reads, Michigan may not require a human in self-driving test cars. And, you know, a lot of the folks who say we're not going to see self-driving cars really as a mainstream thing for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, I've argued are way off. And I think this is just one more example of it. The folks in Michigan would no longer require that someone be inside a self-driving car while testing it on public roads. So this isn't even, you know, once it's been proven as viable, this is go ahead and let them drive around on the streets without anybody in them. Now, we've had a few areas in California where this has been done. So I think this is just another indicator of sort of an across the country embracing of this idea that we can automate this stuff. And we've seen all the different steps in terms of how this is going to change, not only trucking, but also bus driving. And there's even a Mercedes concept car that I read about today that's a van. And right now the intent is that it would have several drones parked on its roof, and there would be a automated distribution device within the van that loads these drones, and a driver would be in the car, and he'd pull up to the property, and the drone would deliver it to the front door and then come back to the truck. The obvious next step would be there's not even a driver. The van drives up, it pauses at the bottom of your driveway, a drone takes the package, drops it off at your front door, and then goes back and docks with the van. So no more guys in brown shorts is probably not too far off if this kind of technology takes off. And if you don't think FedEx and UPS are going to see that as a pretty amazing way to streamline their process by doing something like this, I'm not sure you're paying close enough attention. So this is the kind of thing that's going to revolutionize labor, given all the things now that are potentially capable of being automated. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I share this kind of stuff with you because if you can automate this, imagine all the other things you can automate. We've already talked about fast food. We've talked about a lot of different other areas. There'll come a time where you'll be able to order food from a drive-thru that has never been touched by human hands. No doubt about it. I'm willing to bet it'll happen within the next 5 years that some fast food company will implement this, and there may be a human being in there waiting for something to break, but by and large, you're not gonna be seeing human hands doing a lot of these things. So keep that stuff in mind. I think it's going to represent a very interesting challenge in the future in terms of employment, and I'm not entirely jazzed about it because I still think it's very important for there to be entry-level jobs, for folks to learn what it means to have a job and what it means in terms of owning the responsibility of being there on time, being part of a team, all that kind of wonderful stuff. One other thing I wanted to share, and I'm actually not seeing it in my list, but I know I read it. It was a piece of data pointing out that, here we go, 1 in 6 prime-aged men has no job. That is pretty amazing. Let's see here. We've touted the sub 5% unemployment rate at 4.9 most recently. as confirmation of the economic recovery being successful. What has received far less media attention has been the unprecedented surge in Americans no longer in the labor force, which is, as of August, stood at a near record 94.4 million. The traditional response by economic apologists in the media has been that this number is the result of a demographic change in U.S. society, with mostly older workers no longer in the labor pool. We have over the years argued that that is misleading and that millions of prime-aged workers have fallen out as a result of drastic changes to America's job market, coupled with a structural lack of demand for legacy jobs, which has, for example, sent the number of employed waiters and bartenders to all-time highs, even as the number of manufacturing workers is lower than it was in December of 2014. So here's kind of the thing I think you need to take home. I occasionally get folks who will argue with me on this point, and I think the point to really go for is how many folks that are in that age range that you would normally be employed are not. That's a big deal. And they say, well, if they're not, they're out of the system. They're not taking part. Of course they're taking part. Of course they're taking part. Someone who isn't working but is in the age range, or not even in the age range, right, of a normal worker from 25 to 54, absolutely, they're still eating, they're still drinking, they're still living in a house somewhere. So they're absolutely still consuming resources without participating in the labor force. And odds are they are consuming resources provided by the government, right? So they're absolutely participating in the negative side without participating on the positive side. So, and we, as taxpayers and folks who live in this system, when you contribute less than you're putting in, that puts a burden on you, right? And that puts a burden on the overall economy. So that's really the more reasonable way, I think, to look at these particular numbers. So there was a recent report from the Council of Economic Advisors where NPR notes that 83% of men in the prime working ages of 25 to 54 who were not in the labor force had not worked in the previous year. So essentially 10 million men are missing from the workforce who should be. Putting that number in context, in the 1960s, nearly 100% of men between the ages of 25 and 54 worked. It's fallen over the decades, but it's actually reached this extremely low point. All of that combines, given the low participation rate, so that's a thing all by itself. Then, given the type of jobs, right, that folks are working at, you combine those things, and that's a scary number. If you want, I'll obviously have a link to the article for this on the show notes for today's show. So feel free to check it out. Read the whole article. I think it's really interesting, and it's absolutely worth your time. So make sure to take a few minutes out to check that out. Okay. So now what we can do is move on forward into discussing the changes that are being suggested by the House Financial Services Committee in order to sort of modify Dodd-Frank and see what we think about these changes and see if they sound like a good move and would be something that would perhaps be a bolster to the real estate economy. Before we do that, though, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back to discuss that. So stay right there. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. On this fine Friday, we're taking a quick look at some changes that are being proposed to make to the Dodd-Frank bill, which was actually the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. And the goal here, according to the folks who are proponents of it, is to go more pro-growth, pro-consumer in terms of what they're going to be doing. let's see, it's being called the Financial Choice Act. And they're going to debate this next week. So if you're someone who's a wonk who wants to actually see what goes on with this, you might want to go ahead and Google it, follow what's being chatted about. Of course, if any decisions are made, I'll share them here on the show so we can get a better idea. Now, before we jump, and I realize I always do this and I end up sucking up all the time. I have some interesting observations, I think, relating to how some of the new rule changes that have been put into effect have been affecting the on-the-ground truth in terms of how long it takes to get real estate deals done. I've now had my 3 most recent deals have all had ridiculous delays. Now, the 3 most recent deals, 2 were VA purchases where I was representing the buyer, and 1 was a sale where the other person was not a VA person, so it was just a conventional loan for the person buying the home I was selling. And in every case, we had some interesting delays, not as much in the conventional one. So maybe this is just a warning thing relating to VA, which may also be playing into FHA loans. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But I'm seeing more delays, more bizarre requests once it gets to the underwriter. Let me kind of calibrate you to where that happens. So you start your escrow process. Let's say you've got an offer accepted. You go into escrow with it. You start jumping through all your hoops. All the paperwork goes to the lender, and the lender will get the appraisal, and the appraisal will come in, and they have the long list of paperwork that they want from your buyer. And at some point, it goes to underwriting, and they'll review everything. They'll review, and in my area, you do get a termite report, right? I know we had talked about how this is a regional thing. I went and researched that a little bit more, and there's actually a map of the United States where it's color-coded by risk of termite infestation, and if you are in one of those areas, depending on what color the area is that you're in, you will be asked to get a termite inspection. So there are parts of the country and parts of the U.S., the country and the U.S., wow. There are different parts of California where it's not a big deal. So what I'm telling you isn't even necessarily a California thing. It's if you're in one of those magical areas thing. But in any event, this whole area is in that magical area. The whole area I serve is in the you will get a termite report done if you're getting a loan type area. So what'll happen is then all of that stuff, anything you've generated in terms of reports, inspections, that type of stuff, will go to underwriting if it's been provided to the lender. They'll review all of it, and the underwriters, these are the bean counter equivalents, I guess, in terms of trying to define who they are not your lender. They are not the typically folks that you ever meet. These are all the folks who review all the documents, and they'll come back and ask for stuff. And what I'm finding is a lot more stuff is being asked for. Now, they're always going to want Section 1 stuff done, and anything that's safety related, I've seen them cherry pick Section 2 items. But in my last couple of deals, Section 2 items that were nothing, I mean literally nothing, like shower head leaking, meaning you go get some of that Teflon tape from Home Depot, that white stuff, and you unscrew your shower head and then you wrap it onto the grooves of the screw-in part. I'm sure there's a more technical term for that, and I know there is, and I can't pull it out of my brain right now. But in any event, you wrap it around the threads. There we go. The threads of the screw-on part, and then you screw the shower head back on, and the leak goes away, right? Not only were they demanding those be repaired, but they needed to be done by a licensed contractor. And in lieu of a licensed contractor, I needed to have we had to fix it and then have a reinspection of the termite to come in to then get a clearance. $75 to get a clearance, just a few bucks more in time for the contractor to come in. And of course, it was like $8 in stuff for the contractor to do it, but the contractor wanted $80, $90, $100 and with 1 hour minimum to do this stuff. So there you go. And it's goofy. And then now it happened once, and I kind of went, that hasn't happened in a really long time. I haven't had anybody make those kinds of demands. But these kinds of things are nuts. And so often they have absolutely nothing to do with protecting the consumer or dealing with issues that need to be dealt with. Hey, when it's a safety issue, I'm all for it. If it has anything to do with electrical issues, or if it has something to do with potential leaks that can damage the wood, that kind of stuff, I get it. That stuff absolutely should be dealt with. But what I'm seeing is a lot more stuff that potentially delays things. Why am I telling you this? Because if your agent isn't calibrated to what I think is a more recent change, you're likely going to have to be asking the other. If you're the buyer, you're going to have to ask the seller to extend deadlines. So in the case of the last couple of deals I did, I've had to extend deadlines in both cases. I hate extending deadlines. I like to intelligently pick my dates for these things ahead of time. And what you'll find is the defaults in my contracts, like the 17 days or the 20 days or the 14 days for the various things, are no longer enough. Now, you don't need to change the time you need to do your inspections, but I am going to strongly suggest that the time you are expecting for, you don't need to do it so much for the appraisal. If you're doing VA, you need to do it for the appraisal, because it's not just the appraisal for the VA, it's the notice of value that that the underwriter generates in VA. I'm going to suggest you add 10 days, which is nuts, because in a lot of cases that's a third longer. I think you're going to want to add 10 days to loan contingency and appraisal contingency. You don't need to do appraisal contingency, but loan contingency for everything. And I think you're going to want to do that for appraisal contingency only for VA, in order to just keep things nice and steady. You never want to have an opportunity for someone to back out of the deal. You never want to have those weird little moments. So I like to avoid them by picking my dates really well ahead of time. If you're picking 40-day close of escrow dates right now, I suggest you not do that. I suggest you do them at least for 45, possibly 50 days. Is that realistic in the cases I've seen? You know what? In the last VA I did, absolutely. I needed closer to 60 days to get that one closed. The one I'm working on now, will we close on time? No, I put it down for 40 days to start. We're probably going to close 1 day late. So I've managed to kind of jump in and backfill and make things happen. But I tell you what, again, you want to try to pick your days well. So just keep that in mind. Keep in mind that weird stuff is happening in the underwriting portion of the transaction, which you have no control over. Your lender has no control over. It all goes to underwriting, and I think they lock underwriters deep underground and just throw them raw meat occasionally, with the only outlet for them to express their rage at how the universe has treated them is by screwing up lending stuff. So there you go. All right, so let's jump in and talk about this plan. I'm going to try to avoid saying if it's Republicans or Democrats, because I don't want it to get judged based on that. I want it to get judged on stuff that it's actually doing. So let's try to do that. So we'll just start here at the beginning. House Financial Services Committee made waves earlier this year when they announced a deal to repeal the Dodd-Frank thing and replace it with a pro-growth, pro-consumer alternative. Let's see. Included in the Financial Choice Act is an end to too big to fail bailouts. And to be really honest, describing what was going on in Dodd-Frank as a quote-unquote bailout is probably not horribly fair, but it's close. I'm all for let the banks die when they do stupid things. That when you do stupid should hurt, and it should hurt the banks just as much as it hurts everyone else when they do stupid things. Too big to fail bailouts, dramatic reforms to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and an overhaul of a financial regulatory system that is choking the country's economic recovery, according to the proponents, right? So if you're a proponent of Dodd-Frank, then maybe you don't consider that to be something that's choking the economic recovery. I personally do believe that. Just so you know what my bias is. Let's see. They announced Thursday that the committee will begin meeting next week to discuss the Financial Choice Act. The committee will begin debating the Financial Choice Act on September 13th. Included in that discussion will be the addition of possible amendments to the bill and perhaps a vote on the legislation. If the bill passes out of the committee, it would then go to the full House of Representatives for a vote. The bill is facing a steep hill to becoming law, though, especially... Well, that part doesn't really matter. If passed, the Financial Choice Act would, quote, end taxpayer-funded bailouts of large financial institutions. And that does exist in a kind of a way, but it gives money but then breaks the bank up kind of a thing. I agree with no taxpayer money. In other words, no government money, none of your money going towards bailing out. This specifically says large financial institutions. I would say any financial institution. I'm willing to bet there's some sort of baloney political wrangling in here where, yeah, you know what? there is taxpayer-funded bailouts, but only for banks of a certain smallness. Next, it would relieve banks that elect to be strongly capitalized from growth strangling regulation. Let's see. So they're reducing regulations that slow the economy and harm consumers, and impose tougher penalties on those who commit fraud, as well as greater accountability on Washington regulators. According to the executive summary of the bill, the Financial Choice Act would actually change the name of CFPB to the Consumer Financial Opportunities Commission and establish a new mission for the consumer watchdog of not only protecting consumers, but also ensuring competitive markets. I'm not sure, and again, I'm just a little bit too distrustful, but whenever I see people being put in charge of something like ensuring competitive markets, I imagine positions being created that actually allow people to manipulate markets to the advantage of folks that they may have a good relationship with. And that's always concerning for me. The CFPB may arguably be the single most powerful and least accountable federal agency in the history of our nation. The CFPB director, one man, has the unbridled and unprecedented power to unilaterally declare virtually any mortgage, credit card, or bank account unfair or abusive, at which point Americans can't have it, even if they need it, want it, understand it, and can afford it. Here's a quick bullet point list of the other things that the Financial Choice Act would do. First, it would provide for election to be a strongly capitalized, well-managed financial institution. End too big to fail and bank bailouts. Empower Americans to achieve financial independence by fundamentally reforming the CFPB and protecting investors. Okay. I'd love to find out how they define who the investors are. I'm imagining depositors and folks who had invested in instruments owned by the institution. Demand accountability from financial regulators and devolve power away from Washington. Boy, would that be great. It'd be great to not just devolve, but dissolve that power, but I'll take what I can get. Demand accountability from Wall Street through enhanced penalties for fraud and deception. And this is something that stands outside of even what we would consider something that needs to be part of a bill like this. I actually think our fraud and deception laws are far too weak, simply because I think, and also usually they get weaker the more money that's involved. So I'm all for this kind of stuff. When you engage in these kinds of things and you profit from it, whatever you have made off of that action, that should be the minimum penalty. So if you're some guy who's defrauded people out of $200 million, then the minimum amount you would be expected to pay in penalties would be $200,001, right? Next, unleash opportunities for small businesses, innovators, and job creators by facilitating capital formation. Boy, you could hide a world of sins under goals like that. And again, my personal bias will be showing here in a second. Unleash opportunities for small businesses, innovators, and job creators equals get the hell out of the way. Back out with some regulations, allow businesses to start more easily, and just get out of the way and let people do their thing without a whole lot of involvement from you. And they're talking about facilitating capital formation. So creating ways to create capital. I don't think that's their job. Let the private industry do that themselves. I'd be interested in finding out what that means. Next, provide regulatory relief for Main Street and community financial institutions. I agree with that. But again, it's another one it's another broad headline that scares me. But in any event, that's the goals of the thing. I did a little search to try to find out specifically what each one of those things actually means in terms of actions that are taken. I love lists like this when the lists of actions they take is, we will stop doing this. We will rescind this. Instead, it almost always is, these are the things we will do. These are the actions we will take. And for me, we're at a point where I'd love to see more bills like this that say, and when anything that's super long, right? Dodd-Frank always annoyed me because it was over 2,000 pages long. Anytime you make a bill that long, you are hiding an awful lot of scary, scary stuff in something like that. I want the bills that basically have one page that says, okay, we're stopping doing this. We're no longer doing this. All of this stuff is rescinded. All of these laws are abolished. just a whole lot of get out of the way kind of stuff is really what I go for. But we'll keep our eyes on this. This would clearly have a big effect. Now, how would this affect you, right? Why do we care? One is because it kind of ties into what I was talking about before. We're seeing a lot of weird stuff that is slowing down transactions. Now, at first I thought it was the TRID stuff that we got back in October. And some of it may be, but according to the data that I've been looking at in general, TRID things hit us pretty bad the first quarter, a little bit less the second quarter, and didn't really seem to be responsible for a whole lot of delays as we moved into this quarter. So I'm still trying to figure out where it all is. I'm actually planning on having a post-mortem conversation with some lenders involved in the transactions I'm in right now to figure out the answer to this question. So, it took this long to do this. Why was that? What were the specific things? I'd really love to get some just ground truth, reality answers on what made this take so long. Because let me also set the stage. I want you to really understand how easy this particular transaction should have been. 3-year-old home, 0 issues found, except for the Section 2 items I mentioned, with the shower head, and there was a little area in one of the bathrooms that needed the application of a little grout. There was no damage. There was no water damage indicated. There was no damage at all indicated, but just the inspector noted, yeah, you know what, this could use a reapplication of grout. And he noted that in 2 places. That was it. And the process of dealing with that, getting word back from the underwriters, going back and forth over it, and being stunned, and getting the wrong information initially on what would be required of dealing with those Section 2 items. The original that's very VA specific, and I don't want to keep this as a VA specific conversation. We can have that conversation once escrow closes, and we can talk more specifically about it. But my point is that things like this, in my opinion, would theoretically shorten the amount of time it takes to get this stuff done. It would put us back into a far more reasonable and easily anticipatable, which isn't a word, I apologize, situation where I can reasonably say, you know what, it should take us X amount of days to get this done. And it should take about X amount of days to get that done, as opposed to this weird moving target, which over the last few months seems to be a range of time where I can do the exact same thing, and sometimes it takes 5 days and sometimes it takes 15 days. And I'm not real sure why that is. It doesn't seem to be, there's no great increase in the number of homes that are currently in escrow. It's not like these people are dealing with a lot more transactions. And the property before the one I'm doing now was a train wreck in terms of stuff that needed to happen. It was a 45-year-old home, 50-year-old home, tons of issues, and boy, did that cause problems. This one, no problems, nothing. There's not a thing. There's a thing we do here called an AVID, which is an agent's visual inspection thing that the buying agent and selling agent both have to do. Literally, ours were blank. There was nothing to note in any part of the house in terms of just what the agents would notice. I always like to find something, so I had to point out virtually microscopic cracks in the front porch cement, which had no space in them, no separating, just slight micro cracks. So it shouldn't have been any more. My point is, the sucker should have just gone. It should have gone like a rocket. It should have closed easily. And instead, I've been having to do a lot more stuff than I should have had to do in order to make sure everything went off efficiently here. And that's got a little bit of a warning light going off in the back of my head. So things like this are important to keep track of, particularly if you're looking to buy soon, or you're an investor who's trying to calibrate yourself to timing on these transactions to figure out, how are you going to make things work? How are you going to do that flip? When's the right time to start marketing it for a rental? When are you going to be able to get in there and start doing work? When are you going to schedule time with your contractor, right? Contractors are tough. And if you suddenly have to delay it a week because of some sort of a delay, it's better to be planning for that ahead of time. Okay. Thanks again, everybody, for making this show a part of your daily routine. You have no idea how much I appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to y'all next time.